in this training module, we are going to be talking all about your clinic name, or what I like to refer to as the brand name. Now, I think again, it might be at this stage that you feel you have your clinic name, you have a name in mind, or a name that you've started operating under. Before you make any final decisions, what I want to do in this module is talk through the three concepts behind a clinic, or as you'll keep hearing me refer to, your brand name. The reason I like the term brand name is because, remember, we need to build things beyond the clinic. We want to build a brand, something that people become very familiar with. But for reasons that are outlined throughout this training module, once you pick that name, I do think it's something, once you start implementing the systems throughout this program, that you want to be keeping that name and not changing. So before you dive into a decision, take on board this concept, look at the pros and cons of the three different types of name that I'm going to break down, and then that will allow you to make the perfect decision that suits your clinic. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hop over to the laptop and we're going to start to talk through some of the content and break these things down for you. So when it comes to talking about your clinic name and the decision that you need to make on choosing your clinic name, or what I think is more important to talk about is what we term the brand name. So when it comes to this, I break this down really into three different types of names. So we've got the common name used would be a professional, what I would term a professional brand name. So an example there is the Superior Body Practice. So just something that's quite a general professional sounding term. Then we might have what I would term a local brand name. So for example, where I live, Orpington Physiotherapy would be another brand name. Or we can have what's called a personal brand name. So this is where you might be using your name or initials. So something like JW Sports Injury, or as my company as I've chosen is John W Sports Injury. So what I wanted to talk about was some of the different features of each and why these may be of benefit. So a professional brand name, first of all. So in terms of the pros, what we're looking at, well, it provides a professional feel. You know, as you say, you can really be quite creative with this. You know, just quickly when I was popping this together, I was like the Superior Body Clinic, you know, the high level performance clinic, something like that, that gives that nice professional feel to it. One of the other things that I would say, and this is why it's important to be making decisions now, that we make these decisions that might impact us 5, 10, 20 years down the line. And it's the easiest one to distance yourself from that business. So when I first started, as explained, and I will explain throughout this course, I had quite a small mindset. And so I never saw myself having to distance myself from the business. But as I'll come on to when I talk about personal brand names, is that sometimes it then makes it hardest to distance myself from the business. So people associate me with my business because I have that personal name. So going the other end of the continuum with a professional brand name, later down the line, it's perhaps easiest to distance yourself from the business. And it's perhaps then easiest to scale or franchise. So if you want to grow more clinics, having that professional name might be appealing to somebody who wants to work for that clinic, or there's less sort of identification with one person. So as a result, the easiest to then scale that clinic to multiple venues, or to actually go down the franchise route, which again is further down the line. What are some of the negatives then to taking on a professional brand name? Well, there's going to be a lot of competition around those names. So, because people might be having the same mindset as you, they might be going for a name that you want to be similar. So it might mean that you have to look around a little bit and might be competitive. And as a result, that could be more expensive. So what I mean by that is the price of website domain names might be higher. People might own those domain names, or you might have to go through certain legal fees to register those names that might be more expensive. So that's why it could be a negative to a professional brand name. And the other side, so almost sort of one of the negatives goes the other end of the continuum. It has a less personal feel. So you could argue that if you see the personal feel as being important for your business or your brand, which is why instead of clinic name, you'll hear me talk about brand name, that this one has the least personal feel to it. As I say, for you, you might really like the professionalism of that name, but it would have the least personal feel. So that's just something to consider. Now, so a local brand name. So what are some of the pros of using one of these local ones? Well, for me, what I see is it's fantastic for SEO. Again, you know, SEO experts might argue against, but for me, when you have your local area branded in for a local based business to the name and then to the domain name, so that's the website address, then it is fantastic for SEO and improving the SEO. So for example, to give you an example, in my local business, I work very hard at the SEO, and we rank very high for lots of terms, but the one we rank second for is sports massage in Orpington, and we lose out to a company called Orpington Sports Massage. Now, for me, I look at their website authority score and all these things that, and their domain name and their backlinks and all these things that when we get into SEO and talk about, that you'll be able to see and understand. I appreciate they sound complicated at this moment, but that's exactly what we're going to dive into. But mine is much higher on all those things, but I can't get higher than them at the moment anyway, because they have that local brand name. So that's why it's very, very good for SEO. And it's also, sorry, SEO, I should say at this point, stands for search engine optimization. So effectively ranking high in Google. And this is something that we're going to come on to and talk about in more detail as we make our way through the program. It's very easily identifiable for customers. So again, if I'm called Orpington Sports Injury and I live in Orpington, I know that that's a place that might be suitable for me. I'm looking for sports injury treatment. I live in Orpington. Very easy for me to identify that that is a business that will be able to help me. So that's another positive. And it may allow for some expert or authority in people's opinions. Now, this is one that could be debatable, but again, if I'm living in Orpington and I see that's the Orpington Sports Injury Clinic, then actually what we might look to is there's a stamp of authority there, that perhaps they are the Orpington Sports Injury Clinic, or, you know, the clinic that will be there to help, and perhaps it could be perceived the best in the area for that. Now, that's open to interpretation, I appreciate, but I wanted to mention that as one pro of having a local brand name. And again, like I spoke about with the last one, with the professional, it is then perhaps easier to distance yourself from the business because, you know, you can be part of a team that works for the local brand name. Some of the cons then to a local brand name. Well, potentially then you are limited to one geographical area. So it's perhaps harder to scale and or adapt. Now let me explain what I mean by that. So to pick on this example of Orpington Sports Injury, well then I can't then open a clinic away from Orpington and call that necessarily Orpington Sports Injury, because I might be losing some of those benefits and it might be confusing for customers. The other thing is it doesn't allow you to adapt. So for example, if you set up a clinic where you live currently and you call it by that name, but then you decide to move, you can't really then easily take that clinic and you would potentially have to change the name because of the reasons we've discussed. And this is why, as I said in the intro, it's very important that the decisions you're making now, you're not just thinking in the short term, you're actually thinking in the long term. And when I conclude this, I'll explain a little bit of the sort of real life examples. So that's one thing definitely to think about. That a con to that is it does pin you to that geographical area for either if you grow the clinics. Now, that would be avoidable. So for example, if I was called Orpington Sports Injury and I opened a clinic in a place in Bromley, for example, which is near to Orpington, I could just open that clinic under the name Bromley Sports Injury. But again, what if there's already a Bromley Sports Injury? Then I might need to change those names. So these are all things that you want to be considering and could be a con. It's got less of a personal feel. So I've spoken about this personal feel that we're going to come on to. Again, by calling it a local brand name, there's less personal feel to the name. And it's initially to put people off. So sorry, there realised just hidden behind there. But it could potentially put off people from other areas. So what I mean by that is, if we take Orpington Sports Injury, and someone who might live 20 minutes away might not think, well, actually, I'm not from Orpington, so that perhaps isn't for me. So that's where they might be looking to then go to somewhere that is in their area, even though the clinic could still be quite local. So just another thing to consider there. So the personal brand name. Now, again, throughout this program, I want to make this, as I said, to open up the doors to my business and to let you know how I thought and how I thought. And I'm going to say things that I've done well, but I'm also going to say things that perhaps I haven't done so well, because as I will come to throughout this program, I've made mistakes and I had a small-minded mindset, which I wish I could have changed. And that's exactly what I want to be doing with this program, is helping you not to have that small-minded mindset. So a personal brand name. Well, the obvious thing to this one in terms of pro is it provides a personal feel. So what I wanted to do when I started my clinic was that everybody knew me and the area knew me. And if you got an injury, you went to see John. That was kind of how I felt about it at the time. And that was what I wanted to get across, that when coming into our clinic, there is a personal feel. You're a friend of John and therefore a friend of the clinic. And that's why I went with a personal name. And I think I would still do that if I had the time again. Now, as I said, I don't want to change my name because of all the things that I've done throughout which are going to teach you throughout this program, that have now created a brand and a awareness, and we have good SEO, and we have a good following, and we have good customer identification with us. But if I had my time again, I would have to consider some of the other factors that I've lost out on by having a personal feel. But overall, for me, my business, I've always wanted it to feel personal. No matter how much we've grown, I've wanted to have the feel of a small clinic. So that's why I think a personal brand name does have a very personal feel to it. It's going to be the least competitive. So if you match something to your name, to your initials, there's going to be much less competition. It's going to be easier to get those website addresses. It's going to be cheaper to get those website addresses, and you're potentially not going to run into some of the legal issues of perhaps using other people's registered names and things. So it will allow an expert and authority status as well. By giving it your name, then potentially people then know that you are an expert in that field, that they are looking for your services. So by people then know me as the expert in our local area at helping with sports injury and physiotherapy. But some of the negatives. So, and this is where I'm speaking now from my real life experience. It's hardest to distance yourself as you grow. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. Because the business is John W Sports Injury, we have 3 sites, and currently at the time of recording this, a team of 7 therapists. We still run into the problem that people always want to see me because it's my name in the business, and I've created that expert authority status. So things that have been a pro can also go into the cons column as well, if that makes sense. So something to consider. And as I say, when I started, had a small-minded mindset. I never thought I would be taking on staff. I thought it'd just all be about me. So I didn't see this as a problem. But I want you to think differently, and you will think differently throughout this course. So that has to go down as a big con, that as you grow, it is then harder to distance yourself. Again, this comes down to opinion, but it could be considered the least professional of the 3 types of brand names, and a small-minded approach. So people might see that as a smaller company. So if we take John W Sports Injury, and we take Orpington Sports Injury, and we take Superior Body Sports Injury, people might initially think that John W is the smaller, the least professional of those brands. Again, that's open to opinion, and I think people would do more research into that, and when they see the other things that we're going to show you about throughout this program, about the marketing and the reviews and all those sorts of things, they can make their informed decisions. But that is something to consider in the cons column when we're talking about your brand name. And then really they are the 2 cons that I came up with. I, being brutally honest, find it hard to be impartial with this one. So what I wanted to do was give you my experiences, my kind of why I chose my name, the downsides to me making that decision back in 2007 that are now coming to play for me in 2021. So these are things that you want to consider when you're making this decision. But as I've mentioned, think of it as a brand name. You are going to be stuck with this name, for want of a better term, but I don't like that term because I want you to love this name. This is something that you are going to build, you are going to believe, you are going to get your ethos, your passion, your energy, your enthusiasm is all going to go through this name as you create a brand. So weigh up all of these things before deciding on your final name, because once we go with that final name, then the rest of this program is all about building the clinic behind that name that you want to build. So I hope that this information has been helpful for you in making that important decision.